The spring blizzard that had held Cold Creek hostage for 3 relentless days finally broke, and it struck Wyoming with a fury no one expected. When the thaw came on the morning of April 23, 1878, it brought not relief, but devastation. Snowmelt thundered down from the Medicine Bow peaks, transforming the gentle creeks into roaring brown serpents that swallowed everything in their path. By gray dawn, Main Street was unrecognizable, a churning river clawing at building foundations, snapping fences, and dragging livestock to watery graves. Naya Riverbloom clung desperately to the pitched roof of Hendrix's livery stable. Her fingers bled from scraping the weathered shingles as icy water lapped ever closer. At 26, with sharp gray eyes that cataloged every detail, she balanced precariously despite a right leg crippled by childhood polio. She had crawled here when the ground floor flooded an hour earlier. Her oak crutches, custom-carved and smooth from years of use, already swept away by the first brutal surge. Pressed against her chest was a waterproof leather case, the brass buckles biting into her ribs through the coarse wool of her work dress. Inside lay blueprints and specifications for a modified high-pressure steam engine she had been tuning for Varick Stonevane's freight mill. The prototype was meant to transform timber transport through the mountain passes, boosting capacity by 40% and securing Cold Creek's economic future. Naya had staked everything on this engine. Yet 1 week prior, during a test run with investors watching the machine, had seized like a cannon blast, gears locking the main drive shaft, snapping shrapnel flying across the mill yard. Foreman Reed had accused her immediately, voice carrying over the shocked crowd. Sabotage. "That foreign woman did it, probably colluding with Denver Railroad saboteurs to stall our contracts," he shouted. But Naya held her ground, her bad leg trembling after 14 grueling hours over the engine, her voice firm. "The specifications you gave are fundamentally flawed. The gear ratios cannot hold under operational load. I documented my concerns 3 days ago. Frontier towns didn't trust outsiders, especially foreign women, who worked with their hands and spoke in technical language that sounded like witchcraft. Only Lonnie Earthshade's intervention, the 40-year-old physician whose clinic treated everyone rich or poor, had prevented immediate arrest. She's right more often than wrong, Lonnie had stated flatly. And those blueprints trouble me. Something about them isn't right. Varick Stonevane had grudgingly returned Naya's leather case, but warned she'd never work in Cold Creek again. She had limped back to her rented room above the feed store, reputation in ruins, savings dwindling, confidence, shaken her first real despair since her older brother Orrin Hart died of consumption 2 winters ago. Now, as the stable groaned under her and debris battered its walls, a spinning wagon wheel tangled in chicken wire, a bloated milk cow carcass floating past, Naya clutched her brother's legacy and wondered if she would drown before proving her innocence. A shingle cracked beneath her left palm. Heart hammering, she jerked backward as it tumbled into the flood. The roof leaned eastward. Minutes remained before total collapse. Then, cutting through wind and water, came an unexpected sound, the rhythmic splash of a pole striking the current. Naya lifted her head against the sleet. Emerging from the gray chaos was a makeshift raft, 3 cottonwood logs lashed with rawhide, a salvaged barn door secured across the top. Pulling it with the focused intensity of a man navigating rapids was a figure she knew despite having exchanged only a few words with him before, Tayan Redhawk. The Apache warrior stood balanced at the raft's edge, his broad shoulders flexing, as he drove the pole deep into the submerged street, methodical against the violent current. He wore buckskin pants, darkened nearly black, a wool shirt clinging to his torso, the cheap dye streaked by water. His hair black as a raven's wing, was bound with a single hawk feather plastered to his skull. Water streamed from his strong jaw as he angled toward the stable with absolute focus. Naya had noticed him before, impossible not to, in a town of barely 200 souls. Redhawk kept to the fringes like a wary wolf. He broke horses for homesteaders, traded mustangs with cavalry scouts, and lived in a lean-to where prairie met foothills. People spoke of him in cautious, neutral tones, neither trusted nor entirely unwelcome. He was Apache, and these were dangerous times. Little Bighorn was just 2 years past, with revenge raids and cavalry reprisals turning the territory into a powder keg. Most bands were forced onto reservations, yet Redhawk remained solitary, watchful, inscrutable. Irrational fear flooded Naya's chest as the raft drew near. She had never been harmed by any native, never spoken much with one, but newspaper reports of massacres and lurid dime novels had poisoned her imagination. When the raft bumped the stable's corner, Redhawk looked up. Their eyes locked across 20 feet of howling wind and the churning flood. His face was broad, weathered around 28 or 29. A white scar cutting through his left eyebrow, eyes the color of river stones, gray-brown and unreadable. He offered no smile, no word. Tayan Redhawk simply braced the raft with his pole, then gestured sharply toward the roof's edge, a command clear and unyielding. Naya Riverbloom's throat tightened with panic. "Please," she called, her voice cracking. "Please don't hurt me. I can't move my leg." Her words died on the wind as Tayan, ignoring them, secured his pole and climbed onto the stable's eave with startling agility. The roof groaned under the extra weight, tiles slipping and plunging into the icy water below. He advanced toward her on all fours, his white-capped eyes locked on hers with the same unwavering focus he'd shown navigating the flood. Naya's pulse thundered the leather case pressing into her ribs. She could not run, could not fight, could only watch as this stranger closed the distance. Tayan stopped an arm's length away. Up close, exhaustion etched his features the way his jaw worked as he assessed her position. His gaze flicked to her twisted right leg, then to the case clutched against her chest. He extended a hand, palm up, not threatening, not begging, merely practical. Naya stared at the hand, calloused and scarred nails blunt from work, then back at his face. There was no cruelty, no lust, no contempt, only grim determination mirroring her own stubbornness, the look of someone committed to action. Slowly, she released one trembling hand from the case and placed it in his. His grip was firm, surprisingly warm despite the icy water. He drew her toward him with careful strength, the other hand bracing her shoulder. "Hold the case," he said, voice low and rough, the first words he had spoken to her. "Do not let go." Naya nodded silently. He shifted, looping a woven sash Apache work, dyed red and black around her torso, tying it with swift efficiency. Then he lifted her not roughly, not carelessly, but with methodical precision. Cradling her against his chest, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, he carried her across the disintegrating roof as if she weighed nothing. The stable gave a final tortured groan. Tayan leaped from the eave onto the raft just as the roof collapsed behind them, sending a geyser of filthy water and splintered timber into the air. The raft rocked violently, but he landed with bent knees, absorbing the impact, immediately dropping to one knee to set Naya on the barn door. She gasped, clutching the case, trembling from cold and shock. He unwound the sash and secured it around her waist again, tying the other end to a cleat fashioned from a bent horseshoe. "Stay low. The current is strong." He retrieved his pole and began working them away from the wreckage with deliberate, powerful movements. The flood carried them south toward the collapsed bridge that once spanned Cold Creek proper, a tangle of broken timbers and twisted iron jutting from the water like the ribs of some drowned leviathan. Naya watched fear slowly giving way to numb awareness. He had not harmed her, not hesitated. He moved as if saving a crippled immigrant woman from drowning were the most natural act in the world. The raft spun as it hit the current. Debris pelted them, a cast-iron stove door clanging against the logs, a length of barbed wire snagging the pole. Tayan adjusted his stance muscles, coiling as he fought to steer clear of the looming wreckage. Naya's eyes stayed locked on his face, water streaming from his hair chest, heaving with exertion. She realized with stark clarity that she owed this man her life. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible over the roar. Tayan did not look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the bridge jaw, tightening with a single, almost imperceptible nod. The current seized them, hurtling them toward twisted metal and splintered wood, while Naya's heart pounded against the leather case. Dead cows struck the raft broadside without warning. Naya screamed as a bloated carcass slammed into them, its swollen belly bursting on impact, releasing a foul stench that made her retch. The raft tilted violently, logs twisting against rawhide lashings. Tayan dropped to one knee, driving his pole into the riverbed to stabilize them. Yet the current showed no mercy. The raft flipped. Naya plunged into the water so cold it stole her breath. The sash around her waist yanked tight, throwing her sideways. She flailed instinctively, bad leg, useless good leg kicking against nothing. Water filled her mouth, her nose, lungs burning as she fought for air. A hand seized her collar. Tayan hauled her up, grimly focused, and shoved her toward something solid, the collapsed bridge's stone sill, half submerged, but stable. Naya Riverbloom's hands found purchase on the rough granite, and she clung tightly, coughing and gasping while Tayan Redhawk hauled himself up beside her. The raft was gone. Swept downstream, a cow carcass still tangled in its wreckage. They were stranded on a narrow granite ledge, waist-deep in the surging water. The collapsed bridge a chaotic maze of timber around them. Tayan's left hand was bleeding a deep gash, torn across his palm by a protruding nail, yet he seemed unfazed. His eyes scanned the area, calculating. Then he pointed downstream at the feed store, its second story still above water, the window glowing with lamplight. "Can you hold on?" he asked. Naya nodded, too tight-lipped to trust her voice. He unwound the sash from her waist and looped it around both of them, creating a tether. Finding a length of hemp rope tangled in the debris, frayed but serviceable, he fashioned a crude grappling hook from a bent iron bracket, swung it twice, and released. The hook sailed through the air, catching the feed store's window frame with a solid thunk. Tayan tested the rope, grunted with satisfaction, then turned to Naya. "Hold the case. Hold me. Do not let go." She wrapped her free arm around his neck, the leather case pressed between them, and locked her legs around his waist as best she could manage. He gripped the rope and began hauling them across the gap, hand over hand, the current dragging at them like a living thing determined to claim them. They reached the window. Tayan kicked it open, glass shattering inward, and hauled them both through. They collapsed onto the feed store's upper floor, water streaming from their soaked clothes, heaving with exertion. The room was crowded with survivors, a dozen people huddled in blankets, faces pale and shell-shocked. Among them, Lonnie Earthshade moved efficiently, distributing salvaged medical supplies. She looked up as Tayan and Naya tumbled through the window, sharp eyes assessing their condition. "You two look half-drowned," she said, already reaching for bandages. Rail-thin and tireless, her graying hair pinned in a practical bun, hands capable of setting bones or delivering babies with equal skill, she had arrived in Cold Creek 10 years prior with a medical degree from Philadelphia and a refusal to turn anyone away. His hand Naya managed, nodding toward Tayan. Lonnie crouched beside him, gently turning his palm upward. That's deep. Needs stitching. She cleaned the wound with whiskey and threaded a needle with practiced precision. Tayan's jaw tightened silent as she worked small, neat stitches binding the gash. You saved her life, Lonnie said quietly, tying off the thread. Brave work, she added. Tayan's gaze flicked to Naya, then away. Water doesn't care about bravery. Lonnie wrapped his hand in clean linen and moved on to other patients. Naya remained on the floor, back against the wall legs, stretched awkwardly. She knew she should speak, express more than her choked words on the raft. But exhaustion tugged at her like an undertow. Tayan sat beside her, not touching, maintaining careful distance. Wet hair dripped onto the floorboards, his shirt torn at the shoulder, revealing a long scar resembling a knife wound. Why did you come for me? Naya asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Tayan was silent a long moment. Then, you were alone. Not romantic, not kind, just a statement of fact, as if he would have done the same for anyone in similar danger. Somehow that mattered more to Naya than any declaration of gallantry. She looked down at the leather case, carefully unbuckling it and spreading the blueprints on the floor. In the dim lamplight, with the flood's roar muted by walls, she studied the diagrams afresh. In the margin of the gear assembly schematic was a mark she had glimpsed before, but never truly noticed. Small, precise, stamped into the paper itself, H.H. Varek Stonevane's initials. Naya's breath caught. She traced the letters with a trembling finger, mind racing. These were not her tuning notes, not the original Denver specifications. Someone had swapped them, replacing genuine diagrams with sabotaged versions, marking them with Stonevane's initials. What is it? Lonnie's voice cut through Naya's thoughts. The doctor had finished with other patients, and now leaned over, curiosity sharpening her features. Naya tilted the blueprint toward the light. These aren't the correct specifications, she said. This gear ratio is mechanically impossible. It would bind immediately under load. But that mark, she pointed to the initials, this was from a Denver foundry stamp. Yet the initials belonged to Varek Stonevane himself. Lonnie Earthshade crouched, eyes narrowing as she studied the mark. You're saying Stonevane ordered faulty specifications deliberately, or had them altered? Naya asked, voice tense. Either way, he knew the engine would fail. He wanted it to fail, Lonnie replied, frowning. But to what end? He stands to lose the most from a failed engine. Naya shook her head slowly, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Unless he profits in another way. Engine failure delays freight contracts, gives him leverage to renegotiate terms, and forces the town to fund repairs. And if the town can't pay, Lonnie's voice was grim, he forecloses on debts. Jalen Crochet owes him 2 years of mortgage. The Hendricks barely survive as it is, Naya added. Half the homesteaders in this valley are already under his thumb. A new voice cut through, smooth, commanding, unwelcome. That's a serious accusation, ladies. Rafe Holloway stood in the doorway, water dripping from his polished canvas slicker boots, despite the mud outside. 32, with a carefully groomed mustache and the smooth confidence of a man used to deference, he had arrived in Cold Creek 6 months prior, appointed by the territorial governor. He had aligned himself immediately with the town's powerful men chief among them, Varek Stonevane, a speed of alliance that had struck Naya as oddly eager. Serious accusations required serious evidence. Rafe stepped further into the room, hand resting casually on the butt of his Colt revolver, not quite threatening, not quite innocent. Lonnie moved to stand between him and Naya. The evidence is in the blueprints, Naya said steadily. Stonevane sabotaged his own engine. Or I did. Rafe's smooth reply cut in. After all, she had access. She has motive revenge for being doubted by men who know this territory better than some outsider. That's absurd! Naya snapped, anger overriding exhaustion. Why would I destroy my own reputation? Why would the richest man in Cold Creek destroy his own engine? What does he gain? Rafe countered, voice calm. Before Naya could respond, Tayan Redhawk spoke from his position on the floor, quiet but carrying. The water is rising differently now. The dam is failing. All eyes turned to him. Tayan had moved to the window, staring out at the flooded landscape, expression unreadable. The current has shifted. It hits the dam foundation from a new angle. The wall is undercut. It will fail before dawn. The lower flats, the boarding house. The school, Jalen Crochet's homestead, will flood. Rafe's confidence wavered. How can you know that Tayan did not answer? He simply pointed toward the dark silhouette of Stone Veins Mill upstream, where the retaining wall held back swollen creek waters. Even from this distance, Naya could see water frothing at the base, eating away at the earth beneath the mortared stones. If that wall goes, Lonnie said slowly, dozens will drown. Silence fell heavy, oppressive. Outside, the flood roared on, indifferent to human schemes or fears. Somewhere in the darkness, a wall of water was gathering strength, preparing to sweep everything away. The hours between midnight and dawn on April 24, 1878, stretched into some of the longest in Naya Riverbloom's life. While Rafe organized the evacuation of the lower flats, using his authority as deputy to assume command, despite Naya's warnings about the dam, Tayan Redhawk and Lonnie Earthshade worked in the cold darkness, shoring up what they could. The immediate crisis was the dam, but Naya's engineer's mind saw other vulnerabilities that the deputy either could not grasp or chose to ignore. The overflow channel draining from the dam had a secondary weakness, a stone culvert beneath the mill road already cracked from the first surge. If it failed, redirected water could undermine the mill's foundation and create a secondary flood pulse, hitting the lower flats from another angle and trapping anyone trying to escape via the main road. We have to reinforce that culvert, Naya insisted, as Tayan and Jalen Crochet stood in the mill yard examining the situation by lamplight. Jalen had returned after getting his daughter to safety, driven by gratitude and a desperate need to do something useful. With what Jalen asked, gesturing at the surrounding wreckage. Most of the lumber is waterlogged or washed away, Naya said, eyes scanning the yard methodically, mind cataloging materials, and calculating load-bearing requirements. There, a pile of iron barrel hoops discarded near the mill's cooperage shed. And there were several lengths of chain used for hauling logs, tangled, but still intact. We don't need lumber, Naya Riverbloom said, already moving toward the materials, despite her awkward gait without crutches. We need tensile strength and flexibility, she continued. Iron and chain woven into a mesh anchored on both sides of the culvert. It won't stop the water, but it will prevent the stones from shifting further. Tayan Redhawk understood immediately. He began gathering the barrel hoops, while Jalen Crochet worked on untangling the chains. Naya directed them with the precision of a conductor, calculating angles and load distributions in her mind. Her hands still blistered from the valve wheel work earlier, she ignored the pain, using a salvaged piece of canvas as makeshift gloves. The work was brutal. They had to wade into waist-deep water to reach the culvert's upstream side, working as much by feel as by sight, weaving iron hoops through the chain links and wedging the assembly into the cracked stonework. The current fought them constantly, trying to tear the materials from their grip. Naya's bad leg made her clumsy in the water, but she wedged herself between rocks, using her upper body strength to hold her position while her hands worked. This is madness, Jalen gasped, teeth chattering from the cold. We're going to drown trying to save a culvert. We're going to drown if we don't save it. Naya's accent thickened with exhaustion and determination. The math is simple. This culvert fails, the mill foundation fails, and the secondary flood hits in 3 hours when people think they're safe. I've seen it happen before in Vienna, when the Danube flooded in '62. We lost 200 souls to a secondary surge that no one anticipated. The memory drove her forward. Orrin Hart had been there, pulling her from the water when she was too weak to swim. He had died saving people from mechanical failures others ignored. She would not let history repeat itself here. By the time they finished, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. The iron and chain mesh was crude but functional, distributing the water pressure across a wider area and preventing the cracked stones from shifting further. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would hold long enough. Lonnie Earthshade met them as they staggered back to higher ground, arms full of blankets and a flask of whiskey she insisted they all drink from. "You 3 look like drowned rats," she observed. "But you may have just saved 50 lives, though no one will ever know because the disaster you prevented will not happen." "Engineering is like that," Naya said, accepting the whiskey and taking a small sip that burned all the way down. "The best work is invisible because it prevents failure rather than repairing it." Tayan said nothing, but as they stood there watching the culvert hold against the current, his hand found Naya's and squeezed briefly, a gesture of acknowledgement between people who understood each other without words. The sun rose on April 24th, revealing a transformed landscape. Main Street remained buried under mud and debris, but the waters had receded enough for people to begin the slow process of salvage and recovery. The dam groaned, but held. The culvert held Naya's improvised reinforcement, performing its task invisibly, but her work was far from finished. She needed more than engineering solutions. She needed proof of Varric Stonevane's conspiracy that would withstand scrutiny, because Rafe Holloway had made it clear he would support Stonevane's version unless confronted with irrefutable evidence. The mill office, Naya told Lonnie, standing in the yard surveying the damage. If Stonevane ordered those false specifications, there will be correspondence invoices, something in writing linking him directly to the Denver foundry. The office was flooded, Lonnie pointed out. "Documents may be destroyed. Paper can survive water if treated properly," Naya replied. "And Stonevane strikes me as the kind of man who keeps meticulous records of his schemes. He would want documentation to protect himself if his co-conspirators tried to betray him." Lonnie considered this. "You're thinking like a criminal." "I'm thinking like an engineer," Naya corrected. "Every system has vulnerabilities. Every criminal has a paper trail. We just have to find it." The mill office was a disaster. Water had risen to waist height during the flood. The room was now a soup of floating papers, overturned furniture, and mud. But the office also had a small iron safe in the corner, positioned on a raised platform that had kept it above the worst of the flooding. That, Naya said, pointing at the safe, is where he would keep anything truly incriminating. The problem was immediately clear. The safe was locked, and Naya had no key and no idea how to crack it. She stood studying the mechanism with her engineer's eye. It was an older model, probably dating to the 1850s, with a simple 3-tumbler lock, not sophisticated by the standards of the day, but beyond her ability to pick without tools. Tayan had been exploring the office, and now returned carrying a crowbar and a sledgehammer he'd found in the mill's tool shed. "We break it," he said simply. Naya shook her head. "The noise will draw attention. Dodd patrols this area," Lonnie Earthshade said thoughtfully, "and if he finds us breaking into Stonevane's safe, he'll arrest us for theft, regardless of what's inside. We'll need a distraction. Something that would draw Rafe Holloway and his men away long enough for Naya and Tayan to work." What they devised was simple but effective. Lonnie would report a medical emergency at the far end of town, a fictitious case of a child trapped in a collapsed cellar. It was the kind of crisis Rafe could not ignore without appearing callous, especially with witnesses present. That would give Naya and Tayan perhaps 20 minutes to access the safe and search for evidence. But Naya still needed a way into the safe without making excessive noise. She studied the mechanism again, then examined the safe's construction. Riveted iron plates, strong but not impregnable. The door hung on 2 hinges, and hinges were mechanical components subject to wear and stress. The hinges, Naya muttered to herself. We do not attack the lock. We remove the hinges. She needed tools. Tayan searched the mill and returned with a selection of cold chisels, a small pry bar, and a can of machine oil. Naya set to work immediately. The hinges were old and slightly rusted, which worked in her favor. She applied oil liberally, letting it seep into the pins, then used the cold chisel and pry bar to work the pins upward. It was delicate work. Too much force would damage the mechanism and make noise. Too little would accomplish nothing. She worked by feel, as much as sight-blistered hands protesting every movement, mind entirely focused on the task. Tayan kept watch at the door, his Winchester rifle leaning against the frame, eyes scanning the street for any sign of Rafe's return. Minutes stretched into a tense eternity. Finally, the first hinge pin came free. Naya set it aside carefully and moved to the second. This one was more stubborn threads, corroded and binding. She applied more oil, waited 30 seconds, then tried again. The pin shifted an inch, then jammed. Naya swore under her breath in German, a habit from childhood resurfacing under stress. She adjusted her angle, used the pry bar to apply lateral pressure, tapped the chisel from above, and felt the pin suddenly give way. It slid free, and the safe door sagged on its locked side, now supported only by the bolt mechanism. Now we pry, Naya said, wedging the crowbar into the gap between door and frame. Tayan added his strength to hers, and together they levered the door open with a metallic groan that made Naya wince. The sound was not as loud as breaking the lock would have been, and within seconds they had the safe open. Inside was exactly what Naya had hoped for, a stack of correspondence bundled with string, a ledger book, and a smaller cash box. She grabbed the papers, sorting through them with frantic speed eyes, scanning for anything relevant. There was a letter from a Denver foundry dated 6 months prior, acknowledging receipt of modified specifications per Stonevein's instructions and confirming the order number. Signed by a foundry manager, addressed to Mr. V. Stonevein, Cold Creek Freight Mill, Wyoming Territory. Naya's hands trembled as she read it. This was it, direct evidence that Stonevein had commissioned the alterations. But there was more. Another letter, this one from someone named S. Dodd, addressed to Stonevein at a private residence rather than the mill, dated 8 months earlier, before Rafe had arrived in Cold Creek. Dear cousin, it began, and Naya's breath caught. She read quickly, mind racing. The letter outlined a plan. Rafe would accept the deputy appointment in Cold Creek, establish himself as a reliable lawman, and then work with Stonevein to engineer opportunities for land acquisition through manufactured financial crises. Profits would be split according to an attached agreement. The letter was signed, Your devoted cousin Silas. Rafe Holloway was Stonevein's cousin. The rapid alignment was no coincidence. It was a family conspiracy planned from the start. We have him, Naya breathed. We have them both, she added, gathering the letters, the ledger, and several other relevant documents, stuffing them into her leather case alongside the blueprints. Just as she finished, Tayan hissed a warning from the door. Dodd is coming. 2 minutes, maybe 3. They could not be found there. Naya closed the safe door as best she could, though the missing hinge pins made it impossible to secure properly. They would know it had been breached. but with luck they would not know immediately what had been taken. Naya and Tayan slipped out the back of the mill office, moving as quickly as Naya's mobility allowed. They cut through the mill yard, using stacked lumber and equipment as cover, and made their way to Lonnie Earthshade's clinic. The doctor was already there, having concluded her distraction after seeing Rafe heading back toward the mill. "Did you find anything?" Lonnie Earthshade asked urgently. Naya Riverbloom laid the documents out on the examination table. "We found everything. Letters proving Varric Stonevein commissioned the false specifications. Letters proving Rafe Holloway is his cousin and co-conspirator. Financial records showing debt schemes targeting specific homesteaders. It is all here." Lonnie examined the paper's expression darkening with each page. "This is enough to bring formal charges in Apache City, but it's also enough to get us killed if Stonevein and Holloway realize we have it," Naya said. "We don't give them time. We call a town meeting immediately. We present the evidence publicly," she continued, "where there are too many witnesses for them to silence us. We force a reckoning before they can react." It was a gamble, but Naya could see no other option. If they waited, Stonevein would discover the safe had been breached and move to silence them. Speed was their only advantage. Tayan Redhawk had been silent throughout this exchange, but now he spoke. "They will try to stop the meeting or disrupt it. We need people we trust to protect the evidence and the witnesses," Eli Lonnie said immediately. And the Hendricks family, Naya added, "Stonevein tried to foreclose on them last year. They have no love for him, and probably a dozen others who will stand with us if they see proof." They spent the next 2 hours quietly spreading word of the meeting, enlisting allies, and making copies of the most damning documents in case the originals were seized or destroyed. By early afternoon, a crowd had gathered in the church loft, the only structure large and dry enough to hold everyone. Naya stood at the front, her leather case on the table before her, Tayan Redhawk and Lonnie Earthshade flanking her. She could see Varric Stonevein near the back, his face a mask of calculated concern. Rafe Holloway stood beside him, arms crossed, badge catching the lamplight. The time for subtlety had passed. Naya would lay out the evidence methodically, irrefutably, and let the truth speak for itself. Friends and neighbors, she began, voice steady despite her heart hammering. "I stand before you accused of sabotaging the freight engine that was meant to secure our town's prosperity. I stand before you as an outsider, a foreigner, a woman in a profession dominated by men. I understand why some of you doubt me, but I ask you now to set aside your doubts and examine the evidence with clear eyes." She opened the leather case and withdrew the blueprints, spreading them on the table. "These are the specifications provided to me by Mr. Stonevein. They contain a fundamental design flaw that would cause catastrophic failure under operational load. I documented my concerns before the test. I warned that the engine would fail, and it did exactly as I predicted." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Stonevein started to rise, but Naya spoke over him. "The question is not whether I am competent, my work speaks for itself. The question is why Mr. Stonevein provided false specifications in the first place." She held up the first letter. "This is correspondence from a Denver foundry confirming receipt of modified specifications per Mr. Stonevein's explicit instructions. The modifications match exactly the flaws I identified. Mr. Stonevein commissioned the false specifications deliberately." Murmurs grew louder. Rafe stepped forward, hand moving toward his revolver. "That document could be forged. Miss Riverbloom could have fabricated it." Naya interrupted, producing the ledger. "I have the original ledger from Mr. Stonevein's safe. Entries match the foundry's invoice." She held up the second letter, the one addressed to Stonevein from Rafe Holloway, written before the deputy arrived in Cold Creek, in which Rafe addresses Stonevein as cousin and lays out their plan to engineer financial crises for profit. The crowd erupted. Jalen Crochet pushed forward, face flushed with fury. You planned this from the beginning. You sabotaged our future to steal our land. Rafe's composure cracked. He drew his revolver, holding it ready but not pointing it at anyone. This is sedition. You are interfering with lawful authority. Lawful authority, Doctor, he added. Lonnie's voice cut through the chaos like a scalpel. You are a conspirator and a fraud, Rafe Holloway. The evidence is here for anyone to see. Varric Stonevein finally stood face pale, but voice still smooth. This is a misunderstanding. Yes, Rafe is my cousin. I secured his appointment because I trusted him, but there is no conspiracy. Those letters are taken out of context. Then explain the modified specifications Naya Riverbloom demanded. Explain why you ordered a design you knew would fail. Explain why you marked the blueprints with your own initials. Stonevein opened his mouth, then closed it. No explanation would withstand scrutiny, and he knew it. But Naya had underestimated his desperation. Stonevein's hand moved to his coat pocket, emerging with a small Derringer pistol. Before anyone could react, he grabbed Lonnie Earthshade by the arm and pressed the gun to her ribs. Nobody moves! Nobody follows me, or the doctor dies! His voice rose in panic. The crowd froze in shock. Tayan Redhawk's hand moved toward his rifle, but Naya caught his wrist. If shooting started in the packed room, dozens would die in the crossfire. Stonevein backed toward the door, dragging Lonnie with him. With me, Rafe, he shouted. The deputy hesitated, then holstered his revolver and followed. Within seconds, they had disappeared down the stairs, the sound of horses being mounted echoing from outside. The crowd erupted in chaos. Men shouted for weapons, for horses, for immediate pursuit, but Naya's mind was already working, calculating angles and probabilities. They're going to the canyon, she said quietly to Tayan. To the blasting powder stores. It's the only place that gives them leverage. Tayan understood immediately. The canyon was isolated, easily defensible, and stocked with enough explosives to destroy half the town if detonated. They'll threaten to blow the dam, he said, or the town itself to force terms. Or they'll use Lonnie as a hostage to buy time to destroy the evidence and escape, Naya added, mind racing through scenarios, discarding options, seeking leverage. We cannot let them set the terms. We have to control the situation. How, Tayan asked. Naya looked at the documents spread on the table, at the crowd of frightened, angry townspeople, and at the Winchester rifle in Tayan's hands. An idea was forming, dangerous but potentially effective. We do not chase them, she said slowly. We invite them to come to us. We make them believe they've won, and then we trap them. She turned to the crowd, voice cutting through the chaos. Listen to me. Stonevein and Holloway are desperate, which makes them dangerous. If we pursue them directly, they'll kill Lonnie, and likely trigger an explosion that destroys the dam or the town. But if we give them what they want, if we make them believe they can negotiate their way out, we can save Lonnie and end this without bloodshed. What are you proposing? Jalen Crochet asked. Naya took a deep breath. I am proposing we give them me. I am what they want, the witness they need to silence the engineer who can verify the evidence. If I agree to meet them to exchange the documents for Lonnie's life, they'll believe they've won. That's when we take them. Tayan's jaw tightened. No. Too dangerous. It's the only way, Naya replied, meeting his eyes. You know it is. And you know I won't let Lonnie die because of evidence I uncovered. The look that passed between them communicated volumes, fear, respect, something deeper. Neither was ready to name, but both felt acutely. Finally, Tayan nodded, a tiny movement of acceptance rather than agreement. Then we do it carefully, he said. With a plan, not recklessly. They spent the next hour preparing. Messages were sent to Stonevein via a trusted intermediary. Naya would meet him at the canyon entrance at dusk alone with all the documents. In exchange, Lonnie would be released unharmed. The intermediary returned with Stonevane's acceptance, along with a warning that any sign of a trap would result in Lonnie's immediate execution. But Naya and Tayan had no intention of walking into a trap unprepared. While negotiations were underway, Tayan scouted the canyon approaches, identifying positions, planning fields of fire. Jalen and several trusted men quietly positioned themselves in the rocks above the canyon, armed with hunting rifles and instructions to remain concealed unless violence erupted. Naya's role was the most dangerous. She would approach, openly appearing vulnerable, drawing Stonevane's attention while Tayan moved into position. The documents she carried were carefully crafted copies aged to appear authentic, yet expendable. The originals remained hidden in the church, guarded by men Varric Stonevane had no reason to suspect. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Naya Riverbloom moved toward the canyon heart, hammering mind clear. She carried a leather case identical to her own, stuffed with the copied documents and enough blank paper to give it proper weight. Concealed in her dress pocket was a small metal tube, a smoke canister improvised from black powder, dampened cloth, and charcoal scrapings packed into tin, designed to produce thick, choking smoke when ignited by a friction match. It was a tool for distraction, a way to create chaos if the situation spiraled beyond control. The canyon entrance loomed ahead, dark and narrow walls rising sheer on both sides. A place of death, she thought, where sunlight barely penetrated, and sound echoed strangely off stone. If she miscalculated, if Stonevane was more cunning or desperate than she anticipated, this would be the end of her story. But Naya Riverbloom had survived a childhood illness, an ocean voyage, and a devastating flood by refusing to succumb to fear. She had endured through reason and sheer will against impossible odds. She would survive this too, or die trying to save the woman who had stood beside her when no one else would. Stepping into the canyon, her footsteps echoed, and she called out steadily, "Stonevane, I am here. I've brought what you demanded. Release Lonnie Earthshade, and let's end this." The response came from deeper in the canyon. Stonevane's voice distorted by echoes. "Come forward slowly, hands where I can see them." Naya obeyed, moving carefully through the narrow passage, her bad leg making progress awkward, but her resolve unshaken. Rounding a bend, she saw them Stonevane and Rafe Holloway standing near a wooden shed stacked with crates of blasting powder. Lonnie was bound to a post between them, her face bruised, but eyes alert and angry. The document Stonevane demanded, gesturing with his derringer. "Put them on the ground and step back." Naya complied, setting the leather case down and retreating 3 paces. Stonevane stepped forward, gun trained on her, and snatched up the case. He opened it, pulling out the top documents and scanning them. That was when Naya saw her opportunity. Stonevane's attention was split between the documents and keeping the gun on her. Rafe had moved slightly aside, angle poor, for covering both Naya and Lonnie. The 2 men were close together within range of her smoke canister. Naya's hand moved to her pocket fingers, closing around the metal tube. She had one chance. If mistimed, if the smoke failed to disorient them, they would shoot before Tayan Redhawk could intervene. But she had survived this long by acting when action was required. Striking a friction match against her belt buckle, she hurled the canister at the ground between Stonevane and Holloway with all her strength. The canister detonated with a sharp crack. Thick white smoke erupted, filling the narrow canyon within seconds. Naya dropped flat, covering her head, as gunfire erupted above the roar of shouting and confusion. Tayan emerged from cover to her left, Winchester rifle, speaking with precise authority. The first shot disarmed Rafe, sending his revolver spinning away. A second shot splintered wood near Stonevane's head, forcing him back. More gunfire came from above Jalen and the others, adding their weapons to the fight. Naya crawled through the smoke toward Lonnie, tears streaming from the chemical fumes, lungs burning. She found the doctor by touch hands, working frantically at the ropes. After several agonizing seconds, the bindings came free. "Run!" Naya gasped. Out of the canyon now. But Lonnie did not run. She grabbed Naya's arm and helped her to her feet, and together they staggered toward the canyon entrance through the dissipating smoke. Behind them, chaos reigned. Stone Vane, realizing he was surrounded, made a desperate, fatal decision. If he could not escape, if he could not win, he would destroy everything. He turned toward the blasting powder derringer in hand and fired directly at the crates. No, Rafe screamed, realizing his cousin's intent, but it was too late. The bullet struck true, igniting the powder in a crate. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the world erupted in fire noise and shattering force. The explosion was massive, far larger than anyone expected. The shed disintegrated instantly, shockwave slamming through the canyon like a solid wall, hurling Naya and Lonnie forward. They hit the ground hard, breath knocked from their lungs, ears ringing with a sound like the end of the world. Behind them, the canyon wall began to crack. The force of the explosion, combined with pre-existing fractures in the stone, had destabilized the entire structure. With a sound like rolling thunder, a massive section tore free and crashed downward, burying the blasting powder shed and anyone near it beneath thousands of tons of rock. When the dust finally settled, the canyon had been transformed. Where the shed had stood, there was now only a massive pile of rubble. No one could have survived beneath that crushing weight. Naya Riverbloom lay on her stomach at the canyon entrance, every bone-aching ears still ringing from the blast. Beside her, Lonnie Earthshade was conscious, but dazed blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Behind them, the canyon was a tomb for two men who had chosen greed over humanity. Tayan Redhawk appeared through the settling dust face, grim but unhurt. He dropped to his knees beside Naya Hands, moving over her with professional precision, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. "Can you move?" Naya assessed herself. Bruises, scrapes, abraded hands, but no broken bones. "I am intact," she replied, voice hoarse from smoke and dust. "Dr. May, I will survive," Lonnie said, pushing herself into a sitting position despite Tayan's protests. "Though I will have strong words for you, Naya Riverbloom, about the definition of a carefully planned operation." Despite everything, the pain, exhaustion, and horror of what they had witnessed, Naya found herself laughing. A slightly hysterical sound, but genuine. They were alive. Lonnie was safe. And the evidence was secure. The explosion had drawn the rest of the town. Within minutes, Naya, Tayan, and Lonnie were surrounded by townspeople, some horrified, some relieved, all demanding explanations. Jalen Crochet pushed through the crowd, face pale. "Stone Vane and Holloway," he asked. Tayan gestured toward the rubble-choked canyon. Dead. Buried. They chose to destroy rather than face justice, and in doing so, destroyed themselves. It was grim, but no one mourned them. The men had been given every chance to surrender to face legitimate judgment for their crimes. They had chosen otherwise, and the consequence had been swift and absolute. The following weeks blurred with legal proceedings, community rebuilding, and personal reckoning. Territorial authorities arrived from Apache City, investigated the events, and confirmed Naya's actions were justified as self-defense. The documents she had secured proved the conspiracy beyond doubt, and Stonevane's estate was seized to provide restitution to those defrauded. Yet the most significant revelation did not come from the documents alone. A separate investigation triggered by the territorial inquiry uncovered that the steam engine design had never legitimately belonged to Stonevane. The design had been stolen. Records from Vienna showed that an Austrian engineer, Orrin Hart, developed the revolutionary high-pressure system in 1874. During the winter of 1875, while Orrin was dying of consumption, a business partner named Gregor Steiner absconded with the drawings and shop books. Steiner sold the misappropriated designs to American intermediaries, who in turn conveyed them to Varick Stonevein. The entire chain rested on theft and deceit. Suddenly, Naya found herself in legal possession of valuable intellectual property, with applications far beyond Cold Creek's freight industry. Tayan found her in the courthouse anteroom, as he always seemed to when she needed him most. He sat beside her in silence until she was ready to speak. "It was stolen from him," Naya said, voice thick with emotion. "Everything he worked for stolen by a man he trusted, and Orrin died believing he had failed, that his design was worthless. He never knew it would travel across an ocean and be worth fighting for." Tayan listened, then spoke quietly. "But you knew. You recognized its worth immediately, defended it against accusations, proved its validity through your own skill. You honored your brother's work in the most profound way, not through sentiment, but through competence and courage." Naya looked at him, steady strength in his weathered face, understanding in his riverstone eyes. "I could not have done it without you. You saved my life. You stood beside me when no one else would. You risked everything for a woman you barely knew." "I know you now," Tayan replied, simply. "I know your courage, your mind, your stubborn refusal to accept injustice. You are the strongest person I have ever met." He paused, his hand finding hers. "And I know that I do not want to face the world without you beside me." Naya's breath caught. It was as close to a declaration of love as Tayan Redhawk's practical nature would allow, and it meant more to her than any flowery poetry. "I do not want to face it without you either," she whispered. "I choose you, Tayan," she said. "Not just for today, but for all the days ahead." His hand rose to cup her face, the calloused thumb brushing away her tears with infinite gentleness. "Then we build our life together. Whatever comes, we face it as one," he said. He kissed her then in the courthouse anteroom, a long, slow kiss that spoke of commitment, promise, and hard-won trust. Naya's arms went around his neck, holding him close, feeling the solid reality of him, the warmth and strength that had carried her through the worst days of her life. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears. Summer arrived in Cold Creek with fierce intensity, transforming the flood-ravaged landscape into something new. The town rebuilt, learning from disaster-strengthening foundations and raising structures above the high water mark. Naya made a revolutionary decision with her newfound ownership. Rather than selling Orrin Hart's design to a large company for immediate profit, she established a licensing cooperative, allowing Cold Creek and surrounding communities to build and operate engines collectively, with profits shared among members. It was a bold experiment in communal enterprise, attracting attention across the territory. She also established a proper workshop in Cold Creek, with space for drafting, assembly, and teaching. The first steam engine under the new arrangement was completed in late July. When Naya activated it, the machine hummed with a smooth, powerful rhythm. She had always known it could achieve the sound her brother had died trying to create. Tayan stood beside her as the flywheel spun and said quietly, "He would be proud." Naya nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight. In early August, a sunset painted the prairie gold and amber. Tayan took Naya riding. She had been practicing growing more confident on horseback and now sat before him on his Mustang, with ease approaching comfort. "I've been thinking about building," Tayan said, as they rode slowly through the grass. A house, Naya asked, heart swelling. A real house, he clarified, not just a lean-to. For both of us, if you would want that. Between your workshop and the prairie edge, close enough for your work, far enough for quiet. Good water, good view. Good. A place that his hours built together. He paused. What do you think? I think, Naya said slowly, that I would like that more than anything. To build a home with you, Tayan. A place where we both belong. His arms tightened around her waist in a gentle embrace. Then we start soon before winter comes. 2 weeks later, on a clear August morning, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides, they stood before a small gathering to speak their vows. There was no minister, no church would marry a white woman to a Apache man. But they had witnesses who mattered: Lonnie Earthshade, Jalen Crowshade, and his daughter, cooperative members, and 3 Apache from Tayan's distant band who had traveled to honor the union. I choose you, Naya, said voice. Steady eyes locked on Tayan. I promise to stand beside you, to build with you, to honor your strength and your heart. I promise to face whatever comes together, to work together, to create something that lasts. For as long as I live, I choose you. I choose you, Tayan, replied, voice resonant with emotion. I promise to stand beside you, to protect what we build, to honor your mind and your courage. I promise to face whatever comes, to work together, to build a life of meaning. For as long as I draw breath. They exchanged simple silver rings, each inscribed with a single word. Together, Tayan Redhawk cupped Naya Riverbloom's face in both hands and kissed her a long, thorough, passionate kiss that spoke everything words could not. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, the small gathering erupted in cheers. Wildflowers, scattered songs were sung in Apache that Naya did not understand, but whose joy was unmistakable. That night in Naya's house, the one that would soon be replaced by the home they would build, they lay together, speaking quietly of the future. We start the foundation next week, Tayan said, fingers tracing patterns along Naya's arm. Stone and timber, thick walls for winter. And a good stove for the workshop, Naya added. I want to work through the cold months. Always working, he teased gently. You love that about me. I do, she replied, not a question. I love your mind, your hands, your stubborn refusal to surrender to anything, he admitted. Naya turned to face him, hand tracing the scar through his eyebrow. I love your strength, not just physical, but the strength to stand alone when necessary, to help without expectation, to remain steady when everything else is chaos. He caught her hand and kissed her scarred palm. We are well matched. Yes, Naya agreed. Very well matched indeed. They held each other as sleep came. 2 people who had found not just love, but true partnership. Not just passion, but the kind of steady commitment that would carry them through whatever hardships the frontier might bring. The house they built that autumn became a landmark in Cold Creek. It was not large or grand, but solid local stone timber pitched roof. Large windows, workshop wing for Naya, stable for Tayan's horses. They worked side by side, Naya drafting plans, while Tayan selected materials, both doing physical labor within their limits, hiring help from the cooperative, paying fair wages. By late October, as the first snow threatened, they moved into the finished house. On their first night, they stood at the window, looking toward the distant mountains, a fire crackling in the hearth behind them. We built this, Naya said softly, almost in wonder. Yes, Tayan agreed, arm around her waist. And it will stand long after we are gone, a testament to what 2 stubborn people can accomplish when they choose each other. Naya leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. To what we built, she whispered. and to what we will build in all the years ahead. Tayan pressed a kiss to her temple, and they stood like that for a long while, watching the sunset, feeling safe, chosen, and at home. The steam engine hummed its rhythm in the distance, Orenhart's dream finally realized. Naya's workshop waited for new projects. Tayan's horses grazed peacefully in the corral, and between them all, in this house, built by two people who had survived together, a new chapter was beginning. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real, earned, and filled with the quiet promise of all the days to come, together.